Well, hey friends, and welcome back to the Another Step podcast. In case we haven't met, my name's Kyle, and this is a show all about the habits and rhythms and routines that help people become the person they were created to be. On today's episode number 12 of the podcast, guys, you are in for a treat. Today's guest is Brady Shearer. Brady is the founder and CEO of the company Pro Church Tools, and Pro Church Tools seeks to serve churches and helps them navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years and leverage the other 167 hours of the week that our churches aren't gathering in person. He's the creator of this software called Nucleus that has blessed our church here and has blessed so many other churches. And our conversation today really centers around the rhythms that have helped Brady become the person that he is. We talk about business, we talk about family, we talk about formation, and I really believe that this conversation is going to help you take another step in your journey wherever you are on it. So before we dive into the conversation, I would just invite you and ask you, take a moment to share this with somebody that you know that would be blessed by it. If you're listening on audio, would you consider leaving us a review and a rating? That really does help us as we try to reach more people with this show. But without further ado, let's dive into our conversation with Brady Shearer. Well, hey, Brady, welcome to the Another Step podcast. How are things going for you today?
Great, beautiful day. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. You know, I think we've joked a couple of times about this 10 episode limit, and this is episode number 12. So it's a joking thing, but you know, my coworker Sean and I were talking this morning, and we actually were really grateful for the way that you framed that. For people who might not be familiar, you have this limit and say, "Hey, I get invitations from podcasts all the time, but I'd like to see 10 episodes before I come on." And what we're really grateful is a lot of people are like, "Hey, I want to see you get a certain number of views. I want to see you get a certain number of follows or shares or whatever before I'll come on your podcast." But instead, you are after the consistency. You are after the commitment and the craft of making the thing happen. So we wanted to do that. And then instantly we're like, all right, we're reaching out to Brady and getting him on here. But for those of our audience who might not be familiar with your work, can you just take a moment and just share kind of a Cliff Notes version, what you do on a daily basis and what you're involved with up in Canada?
Yeah, certainly. So I do live in Canada, Canadian myself. I live in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Surely most of the listeners are familiar with Niagara Falls. Niagara-on-the-Lake is directly adjacent to Niagara Falls. If you ever do visit the Niagara region, I would recommend that you see the falls, then escape them very quickly because it's a bit of a tourist trap down there. It's a bit of a discounted Vegas. And then come to wine country in Niagara-on-the-Lake, where it is beautiful and great time for vacation. I married for 13 years, 2 children, an 8-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old daughter, Lily and Sadie, wife Brittany. And I went to Bible college to be a youth pastor. So I got connected to church in a big way, in a serious way in high school. And I went to this Pentecostal youth group to where I met my wife now. And they had drums and they were like loud. And it was like the first place ever that I felt like, hey, I'm accepted here. I grew up playing a lot of sports, grew up pretty well doing in academics, never really fitted in either groups. But then in church, in all of my craziness, I was accepted for who I was. And so I was like, man, I want to become a youth pastor. I want like to be what my youth pastor was to me, to others. Yeah. So my wife and I moved across the country. We were just dating at that point. And we went to Bible college. And it was a few years into Bible college, I got an internship at a new church plant to be their media director. And pastor put a camera in my hand and basically said, hey, you have shown the ability to learn skills. I don't think you have any here just yet, so go and learn them. And it was at that point where I was like, this is awesome because I want to keep working with churches, but I don't think that I'm especially well suited to be a pastor. I was kind of learning about myself, like there's just a relational bandwidth threshold needed to be a good pastor. You know, you have to really give of yourself to other people. And the more that I was discovering myself there, you know, a 21-year-old, I was learning that I loved to work with churches, but the relational side, I wasn't perhaps, you know, genetically DNA wired to do very well. And so I started learning these skills on the fly. Cameras, photography, videography, design, communications, branding, web. And then I went back to my classes and I'd see my friends that are going to become youth pastors themselves, worship pastors, plant churches in rural Canada. And I was like, man, they're going to need to know how to set up a Facebook page as well. And so I started teaching what I was learning. So I launched a YouTube channel in 2012, and I started a blog, prochurchtools.com, worst name ever. But it was recommended by my best man. He had like 14 different permutations of the name. He's like, you want to show excellence, but it's church related. You're helping them with digital tools. So prochurchtools.com. And we started a podcast 2013. And basically we've been doing that ever since. So we've built up an audience on all of these platforms. We've been teaching ever since. And then we started a product and we started another one. And now we run a software platform called Nucleus, which is a church website builder. 3,000 plus churches, including the host of this show, I understand correctly, host their church's website on that platform. We have a social media agency for churches where we work one-on-one with churches, social sermons, and got about 200 churches on that platform. But the thing that's remained true ever since, as we've hired 20 plus full-time creatives on staff now, is we keep teaching churches how to, as we like to say, navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years.
Well, I'll tell you, we not only love the stuff that you guys are doing with Nucleus, but we love all of the other resources that you guys have been creating. And it seems like you're able to tap into so many. I mean, I was looking at your YouTube page earlier, just kind of looking at all the videos that you've created recently, and you go everything from branding to communications. You have conversations with creatives in different churches, and you're just keeping the conversation rolling about how we can, as you guys say, leverage the other 167 hours of the week. And that's kind of become this heartbeat that you guys have gone with. But I want to go all the way back to a moment that you mentioned. I know I've heard it in your story before, but you talk about you had this internship and they put a camera in your hands and they said, hey, go and learn and create and kind of chase this thing. And I'd love to kind of go back to that moment, kind of the former Brady and kind of where you are now. How transformative was that moment for you? Was there fear involved, or was this just like, hey, I have finally found something that I'm passionate for, and then you grew in it? What was that moment like?
Well, my response to things was I always liked learning new skills. So before the creative side of things, I had an entire, mini music career where I was, recording albums in my, in my bedroom, laying down all the tracks. It was getting radio play on, local Christian radio stations. And before that, like I played basketball at a pretty high level as a, youth and adolescent. One of the guys I remember playing against just, got traded to the Raptors, and it was exciting to see him, come home. And I'm 5'8", so you can imagine where that career eventually ended. And so, I just always would attack a new skill with a ton of tenacity, and I wanted to learn everything about it. I have the type of personality that wants to climb to the mountaintop, ambitious, solve this thing. And so that's kind of how I am wired. I'm more of a tinkerer in the lab rather than the person that's shaking hands and meeting people. That being said, I remember the first time we went out with that camera to do a shoot, when you're learning creative skills and really any skill, you usually start by modeling someone else that you look up to. So there was this specific video done by, at the time, City Church, which was, Judah Smith's church. And they basically did this type of time lapse that makes everything in the time lapse look like a miniature. It's called a tilt shift lens effect, where the corners of the frame are blurred, and just blurring the corners of the frame in a time lapse makes everything, if you have the right motion blur, look like little miniature cars inside of a doll world almost. Barbie before Barbie. And I was on the corner of this busy intersection in this city I was living in, the most northern major metropolis in North America, Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And we're on the corner and we didn't have a tripod. So we put the camera, we propped it up on this electrical box. And this is, 2010. And we're just taking photos of this intersection. And I don't know, within about 20 minutes, the cops roll up. And they're like, son, why are you taking photos of these passerbys? This is before everyone had phones and was taking photos of all things all the time. So why are you taking photos in a really sketchy way of cars that pass by? And I was like, it's just a tilt shift lens? No, you probably don't. I'm working at a church. Okay, I'm not really working. I'm interning at a church. Very quickly, he was like, go home, son. Just go home. And I was like, okay. And I remember being like, well, this was the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Like, that was so embarrassing. I do not like those types of confrontations. I'm trying to help, but clearly the optics are bad. And I remember pushing through that moment and being like, you know what? Clearly the people that did this in Seattle had the same type of approach. Like, maybe I got to find less conspicuous places to shoot. And so we pushed through that. And I remember that the vision film that we put together, and that was my first big major project. It was putting together a vision film for this church plant. It was received incredibly well. And I remember the pastors saying, this is way better than we could have expected from your first project. And I remember taking a similar approach. I had a family member once commissioned me to paint something for them. He was like, do you paint? This was 7th grade. I was like, no, I don't paint. He's like, well, I want you to paint this. And I remember finishing it for him. And he was like, this is so much better than I could have anticipated. And I was like, okay, there's something here. I have a skill here. So let's keep pushing it. And like most things, it becomes this snowball effect, either for good or for bad. You know, if you have enough bad things happen to you, you start to kind of maybe have a worldview like, man, just for me, I just run into bad luck.
Yeah.
And this positive thing happened. And so I was like, let's keep working at this skill. Let's keep developing it. And then like another project went well and another one. And then, and this is what pushed this specific skill and project for me beyond the music one and the basketball one and the painting one, all of which kind of hit a ceiling that was not, you know, professionally viable as a ceiling, fun hobbyist, but stopped there, was I started getting reached out by other churches. And they're like, hey, would you be able to put a video for us together? Would you be able to do this together? And then I got really excited about online business because we were living, as I said, in like the snowiest, winteriest place ever. It's so cold that it's where Celsius and Fahrenheit reach. You know, every time I talk to an American that deals in Fahrenheit, we have to figure out, oh, it's a great day. It's, you know, yeah, it's 8 degrees here. And they're like, 8 degrees? And I'm like, well, Celsius, which is actually like, it's -30, -40 there in the winters. That's the same on Celsius or Fahrenheit. And I remember my wife was working insurance, and they don't really plow the roads there because everyone just knows like it's not worth the effort. They don't even salt the roads. They just sand the roads. And where I grew up, you salt the roads in my part of Canada. Like, we don't have any snow on the road. We salt it, and hey, your car will deal with the salt. But it's better than the accidents that come from not salting it. Not in Edmonton. Yeah. And I remember these harrowing commutes, Kyle, early in the morning. Like, it's 5 a.m. You have to plug your car in at night or else it won't turn on in the morning. And we're driving on these roads, and my wife's working insurance, and we're 21, we're newly married, and I can see her soul like just like slowly just expiring as she works these terrible jobs with people that are miserable. And I was like, this can't be what life has for us. And I don't think pastoring in that capacity is going to be the answer for me. I don't think I'm going to serve people well in that capacity, but I want to work with churches. And online business was just starting to become a thing. And I was like, maybe at the intersection of online business and these creative skills that I'm learning, and what I see as this future of social, like it's small now, but I think it's going to be big. Maybe there's something there. And that was kind of the inception point for what became this company.
Yeah. Yeah. You start something from small, and now you have created, I mean, really, I don't know how many churches you guys have actually connected with over the past, what is it, almost, is it a decade? Have we hit a decade?
It's a decade.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you have any idea from the very beginnings? I mean, and I would love to kind of hear the backstory of kind of maybe those really early days. I'm sure it's kind of very similar to a lot of companies, you know, a card table in the living room, getting things done at home kind of deal. But do you have any idea how many churches you've been able to connect with over the past decade?
I mean, the amazing thing about the internet is you don't truly know, and you go to conferences and you meet people in person, and they come up and they shake your hand and they say, hey, this is what happened in my church. Yeah. And you're like, oh, wow, that's amazing. And, you know, you can see the numbers that are public. Like, we crossed 100,000 on Instagram last week. We have 150,000 on YouTube. And our email list that we continually prune to make sure like it's only active churches is, you know, north of 50,000. And, you know, you create 700 podcasts and 700 YouTube videos and 700 blog posts over a decade. And, you know, not everyone's going to follow you for the duration of your professional career, but you know, presumably you're positively affecting churches, you know, all around the world. And what's cool about that is knowing, hey, one day on the other side of eternity, you get to know all the stories instantly. But right now you just see, you know, kind of like Paul sees, you know, it's like a mirror right now. You get to see just a fraction of it. And that's more than enough. Like, you know, I was on a call with a church last week, and they were saying how when COVID hit for them, they started a YouTube channel, and that YouTube channel went from 0 to 200,000 plus as of this month. So like in 5 years. And they said that when giving went down, the YouTube channel was generating a ton of giving as people watched services online. And, you know, he said after the call, he's like, I don't know if our church would have made it. He's like, I watched one of your videos. We started the YouTube channel. I don't know what would have happened if we didn't do that. He's like, maybe things would have been fine. But because of what we did, and all credit to them because they did that thing, right? Yeah. You know, you share the ideas with the world, you share what you think is going to be useful, and then a small fraction of people actually put it into practice. And so those stories, you know, of course, just fulfill everything, make it all worth it, all the hours that you put in, feel great.
Yeah. Wow. That has to be regularly inspiring. And I can imagine in those early days, you probably didn't have any even a glimpse of what now would have been like. I mean, it's amazing. You know, you start very small and simple, and yet God takes things and he just grows them into ways that we can't have imagined. So I told you earlier, you know, I had the privilege of having Alex Mills on just a few weeks back in December, on the Another Step podcast. And one of the questions that I asked him was, what is it like working with your friends? Because I've heard you guys talk about before, like, is it every person at Pro Church Tools? Like you either knew each other growing up or something like that? Like, is that the general makeup of the company right now?
Yeah. So the first 8 employees that we hired were from youth group. Sorry, first 7. And then the 8th was Alex, who was already living in Niagara and was a friend of a friend. My OG pastor, that just put that camera in my hand, who coincidentally just left my house an hour and a half ago. He was staying with us all this weekend, him and his wife. You know, they live on the other side of the country. We don't get to see them that often, but he was just here. Great catching up with him. He introduced me to Alex. So Alex was like employee number 8, and he was the first person that like we didn't go to youth group with. Yeah. And, you know, I didn't know what I was doing running a business. Barely still do in some respects. And so everyone we were hiring, I was like, we can just learn on the job together. And then we eventually, you know, started another department, another company, another division, and we had to hire like developers and product designers. And, you know, there's like 8 of them. And I didn't go to youth group with them. And then we started the social media agency. And then we hired, you know, 6 new full-time creatives from there. I didn't know them, but those first kind of like, you know, 8 employees were friends of ours. And working with friends has been the greatest, most rewarding part of the business. It was why I started the business. It was the second goal after don't make my wife work at this terrible insurance job. Because I grew up watching a lot of sitcoms. You know, a lot of my humor and personality, you know, you start by you copying someone, right? And then hopefully you copy enough people that you combine those voices into one and it's yours and it's unique. And, you know, so I'm watching, I'm a Seinfeld's growing up. I'm still watching it every night. It feels like, you know, The Office and Friends and Frasier and everything in between. And I remember these sitcoms. I'm like, oh man, it's so cool. Like these people are friends, even though they all work at the same company. They're friends, even though they work at a parks department. They're friends, even though they work at a police department. Like, you know, you look at their weddings and it's all people from work. And I was like, man, I'm worried because I kind of feel like what's going to happen is my friends in high school and college, they're going to have to put their families first. And we're all going to end up in different places and we're not going to get to see each other. And I was like, it'd be cool if this company could like hire them and, you know, we would be able to stay in each other's lives as long as we want to, indefinitely. We wouldn't have to basically sever relationships because we're moving across the country to chase a career opportunity that we love, that's great for us, but comes at this cost. What if you could like, you know, have both? And so that was, you know, what we've been able to do so far. And it's been crazy seeing the change in stage of life because when we got started, we all made no money. And we all had no kids and no mortgages. And some of us, half of us weren't even married, right? So we're all just like these like single people just doing this together the way we were all throughout youth group and Bible college. And then now, you know, most people are married. Most people have kids. Most people have a mortgage. And we went to our corporate retreat last week in Punta Cana, you know, flew everyone in their families of that first tier of employees down, all 21 of us, 8 kids, 7 under 2 years old. And so the stage of life has changed a ton, but you know, it's a perilous game mixing business with family, business with friends. And there are a lot of kind of safeguards that we've put into place to ideally mitigate those hazards. And I think we've done a great job of it so far through 10 years. But there's no point where that danger isn't always lurking. And so you have to really actively fight against it. Otherwise, things can go south. There's a reason why people are like, never mixed, business and pleasure. And there's a reason for that. I think it can be done, but it is hazardous.
Yeah. So you mentioned like some safeguards that you've put in place to kind of at least hopefully mitigate some of the possible issues that can come with that. Would you mind sharing one or two of those?
Yeah. I mean, I would say the biggest one is compensation. It's really as simple as that. I have from the very beginning aspired to pay my team well. And, right now we are in kind of like the top 10% range of Canadian salaries.
Wow.
And for those first tier employees, and that's, new as of this year. Before that, we were kind of just outside. Before that, we were a little farther outside. Like, they've been here for 10 years. They've been building with me as we've gone up there.
Yeah. And
so that creates a lot of margin. It creates a lot of cover for potential bitterness and, seeds of resentment. And that's what we're trying to fight against a lot, and we also have a code of values. I think you can put in values, you can cast vision. If everyone's being underpaid, I don't know if that can cover up for the lack of compensation, because people have, ends that need to be met and budgets that need to be accounted for. Yeah. So we have a couple of values, and I can read a few out. One of them is called the family you choose. And it's described as this: relational longevity is our target, choosing to be in each other's lives through the ups and downs and ever-evolving stages, toasting each other's triumphs, not abandoning another in grief. We know not every relationship is for life, but often our need to make a living will force change upon us that fractures our closest relationships. We want to invert this. We work to live. We don't live to work, because family should never be collateral damage. We have another one it's just called vibes. And it's defined as this: productivity is not the highest goal. The bottom line is not the ultimate motivator. For what will it profit us to gain the whole world, yet forfeit our souls? Practically, this might mean choosing a hybrid work week over peak efficiency, or investing in memorable shared experiences instead of stashing a bit more away in the savings account. Structurally, we won't sacrifice our collective well-being on the altar of private enterprise. There are a few more, but I think you kind of get the theme from that. Yeah. And, it puts a lot on my shoulders, which is, in one more value that I'll read called clearing the runway. It's defined as this: we're not naive. What we're trying to do here is ambitious, and the world's systems are not made to cater to this ideal. This means we're always forecasting what's to come and preparing to remove obstacles on the horizon. Basically, we never want to go back to the way it was before. So we have to basically do extra work to account for potential things that might not make this optimal or doable. And so that creating margin and then protecting that margin is really what comes, how it comes down to how we kind of protect that balance that is very, very fragile.
Yeah, I love the intentionality that you've put. And if anybody listens to you for 5 minutes, they know how planned and intentional you are. I mean, I have heard you joke on many, many occasions about your spreadsheets, and I would just I love it. I absolutely love it. But even the intentionality that you've brought down to how you're going to structure and navigate these, what can be complicated relationships. Because I can imagine if you're really good friends with one of these guys and something doesn't go well at work, you really have to be intentional about how you navigate moving forward so that the relationship is what stands central, and that's what lasts. So I love that you've been able to do that. Has that always gone well, or do you find that sometimes that gets messier than you'd like for it to?
Well, I mean, practically, it puts a burden on the business's budget that wouldn't be there if you simply were hired guns, right?
Yeah.
If that wasn't a reason to invest the way you do,
sure.
We could save, we could cut costs if we did this, but that profitability was never the goal. And we are quite profitable. So far we haven't had to sacrifice anything. But when I first started this business, I was making $1,200 a month at the church. Yeah. So all I wanted to do was replace that $1,200 a month.
Right.
And then when I did that, it was okay, replace my wife's income. She was making $30,000 a year. Okay, replace that income. Now, how do we basically cement it so that income is replaced indefinitely? okay, how do we hire one employee? And you kind of just go from there. And things scale, and you need more money, you have kids, you buy a house, the mortgage, like that's changed for our employees as well. But the idea is, like any relationship, you want to invest enough so that when things get sticky, you have the equity to navigate that together. The difference between my relationship with my employees versus, let's say, a marriage relationship is that ideally at its best, a marriage relationship is basically equal parts. Each partner is investing in the other, and that way everyone's taken care of. The way that this has to work is that I have to invest more than I ask for in return. And that is kind of how you allow the safeguard to exist indefinitely. I had to have a very difficult conversation with an employee last week, and they responded incredibly well. And I think a big part of that is because it's very rare that we have to do those things. Right. And we've created that equity that a person is willing to reciprocate. Whereas if you go into a conversation like that and they're already like, yeah, well, and if I got paid more, and if I had better benefits, and if he wasn't always asking me to work extra hours, and he's always never gives me any never acknowledges what I'm doing, then that type of conversation can't take place because it becomes explosive. Because all those things that have been simmering rise above. We have another value. It's called say the quiet part out loud. You don't need the definition. It's pretty self-explanatory. And that has become almost a joke upon itself as, we have these difficult conversations. The team came to me in COVID and was like, hey, the pay that you gave us is a good pay. The spending power of that pay is different now that 2 years of inflation have taken a toll. And I was like, oh, okay. They're like, we need to basically get paid more so that the spending power we previously had is the same. And they were willing and able to do that, I think, because we had fostered this open communication protocol, which is great when you write it on the value, right? It's like, say the quiet part out loud, great, until you have to have these tough conversations, and then you're like, oh, my goodness. So yeah, it doesn't always make things easy, but every relationship is that way, right? Like, who hurts you the most in the entire world? Probably your spouse. What's the most rewarding and who's the best to you in the entire world? Probably your spouse. The closer you are to someone, the more they have the ability to love you well and hurt you deeply. And that is kind of just the byproduct of closeness and intimacy. So we can't avoid that either. We can't pretend it's not there. That's where resentment and bitterness begins to simmer. It grows into something greater. And that's when you might have these parting of the ways because it's no longer viable.
Part of what was really interesting and fun about my conversation with Alex, in a very similar vein to this, was Alex and I actually share something else in common, is that he works in ministry with his dad, as do I. My dad and actually my uncle as well are shepherds at the church that I work at. And that's relatively new. We're still navigating some of what that relationship is looking like moving forward. But a lot of what we're talking about here with working with friends, I think deeply applies in my own context and in similar contexts as well, for people who find themselves working alongside family. And I think it spans regardless of whether it's a faith-based context or church or not. The complexities of those relationships are there regardless. So I love the way that you've been able to kind of set the tone and set a standard for how you can navigate those potentially complex moments. And thanks for being really, open and honest about, hey, we had a actually really difficult conversation last week. Like, I think that's honorable and really beneficial for our listeners as well. I feel like I've heard you guys go through some of those values maybe on your podcast as well. Is that list of values, is that posted anywhere? Is that published anywhere publicly?
We did a recent podcast episode where we went through them all in full on the Pro Church Tools show. That's our podcast. It has its own YouTube channel. And the podcast episode was called, Our Rules for Life. It was from 2024, early 2024. The thumbnail is like my non-negotiable values, and every one of them is in that episode.
I love it. Yeah, we'll make sure to link up in everything, from the Brady Shearer YouTube channel, the Pro Church Tools podcast YouTube channel, all the things down in the description below or in the show notes of the podcast. So if you're listening or watching this and want to dive deep, y'all, there is a wealth of resources that Brady and the team at Pro Church Tools have put together. So I can imagine that over the past decade, you've gotten to work with a lot of churches and continue to. You said last week you were on a call with churches. I think in the world that we're in right now, it's so easy to point out the things that are bad, the things that are hard, the things that are challenging or that we wish we could change or whatever. What's encouraging to you right now, particularly about the church? What's making you feel good moving forward?
I think there's a lot to highlight that's positive. I'll focus specifically on the work that I do. We call this shift in culture that we're seeing right now the biggest communication shift in 500 years. That is a reference, of course, to the printing press.
Yep.
And the printing press had a lot of similar fears and pushbacks when it came out, because what it did was it put the written word into the hands of the every person, every man, every woman, like, okay, is this what we want? And what did it do? It set off in motion, inevitably, the Reformation. And we start reading the Bible for ourselves, and we're like, wait a minute, is this what it actually says? And, the 95 Theses and banging it on the door. And it changed culture in dramatic ways. And so what encourages me the most is seeing churches and pastors and ministry leaders take the advice that we're sharing, put it into action, and now the good news is being shared with thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. I got a DM, and I get DMs like this all the time, from a church the other day, smaller church in Montreal, and they DM me and they're like, hey, we did a post, we followed the template that you mentioned, and it blew up, and our follower count doubled overnight. And then I checked in with them 2 weeks later, and they're like, yeah, that post is still getting a ton of views. It's still attracting new followers. And every post we've published since then is way higher on the momentum scale. And, you might be listening to me like, okay, what do numbers of this mean? Well, discovery algorithms in the current era of social that we're in mean that your local geographic location plays a big role in distribution. So a ton of those people, disproportionately more than any other, saw that were local to Montreal and are now aware of a local church that they perhaps were not before. They got interaction with a church that we never interacted with before. They followed a church that they didn't follow before. We started working with a church, and the pastor comes to me and he's like, I just want people to know that our church exists. We've been in this region for 40 years, and I still meet people and they're like, there's a church like that exists. It's where we are. I didn't even know you were on. So we start, doing social for him. And, within a month, he's interacted with two people, one very memorable interaction where he goes to the grocery store and he's picking up groceries, and he had put in an order ahead of time. He said he wasn't having a great day. He's like, he's waiting impatiently. They're taking a while to get the grocery order for him. They finally come up. The employee at the grocery store has his order, and kind of stops when he sees the pastor. He's like, okay, this is crazy. Are you a pastor? Because I saw you on my TikTok feed this week. My wife and I are new to the area. We were looking for a church. We're going to be attending this weekend. And they just met in person. And so this pastor writes us and he's like, can you believe that happened? And I was like, I can. This is awesome. Rejoice. And this is happening, for churches that we work with directly, but even more so, we basically teach everything. We don't hold back on any educational material. It's not like we don't have courses to sell. We don't have masterminds to, upsell you to. Well, that's where we'll really tell you how to do social. We're glad to do it for you if you want to pay us to do it. Otherwise, just go do it yourself. We're going to teach you everything that we do exactly. And so knowing that that's being put into place and the interactions that are being made, people think social is small. Social is colossally big. The printing press, that simple act of the written word being put into the hands of every person, dramatically changed the future of the Christian faith and the landscape of the entire planet. Social media is doing the same thing. Social media has downsides. Social media has things that we need to be very, very aware of. And we need to put in protocols to keep people safe, to keep our children safe, and to help everyone navigate it a bit better. The offshoots of loneliness and anxiety and separation and people not being together are very, very real. We Don't pretend that those things don't exist. And I also then would say that the church is uniquely positioned to meet people in that way. The third place, the place in culture that is not work and is not home, is disappearing in society. It used to be the gym, the cafe, the church. And if church can use social to connect with people for the first time online and then get them connected in person and get into real community and start brushing shoulders with people that are not like themselves, the beauty of the church, different ethnicities, different ages, different socioeconomic status, that is where online and in person can begin to converge and do beautiful, beautiful things together. And so when I start thinking about that, seeing it actually happen, because when I first started this, Kyle, it was the idea, the theory of it. Hey, fitness influencers are using social in this way, and it seems to be working. Can we translate that to the church world? It was a hypothetical. I believed in it. Many people didn't. As our age group, our generation has grown up, and we've seen social continue to transform the culture, now it's beginning to be seen in real ministry context, and it's tremendously exciting and rewarding.
Yeah, it's one thing to like have a crazy idea, and I'm sure a decade ago it probably felt like that, because a lot of people were probably like, I'm just not buying into this thing. But to hear those real stories, to hear like, hey, I had this thing that I shared with people, and now they came up to me in like real life, and they were like, hey, I saw your face. I can imagine that those stories are quite inspiring and kind of keep you moving. Moving forward. So there's no doubt that when somebody listens to you, not only are you incredibly knowledgeable, you're experienced, you move through these things with a lot of grace and passion, because this is something that you've lived. This is not just something that you've like sat back and just like thought about. Like, you've put this into practice. You've got a company that's putting this into practice, and you're leading people, and you are growing a team that started with just a few friends from youth group, and now spans divisions and areas and all of the things, and all of that is great. But this show in particular is about the individual growing to become the person that they were created to be. You and I share a worldview. We share a faith in God. So the way that we would describe it is like you're becoming the person that God created you to be, that God imagined when he created you long ago, when he thought up Brady Shearer long ago. You are becoming that kind of person. But the beautiful part of it is what we see over and over and over again is that God doesn't just like snap his fingers and we become that person. Like, instead, he invites us to participate in it. He invites us to play an active role in our transformation, in our growth. And one of the things that I've loved about doing this show is hearing from people about the different, habits and routines and rituals, or whatever word you want to put to it, whatever that is. So are there one or two things, like one or two habits and rhythms, we've already kind of talked about your spreadsheets, but like that are helping you become that person that God created you to be?
I really like the way you phrase that. Like, hey, God thought of Brady Shearer, insert your name, listener, here, this long ago. And there's a version of you that he's inviting you to become. And are you getting closer to that version that he imagined, or are you like actively choosing to become a different version of yourself? I'm going to think on that. The beginning of the show, you mentioned that you liked the way that I, invited you to invite me on the show after 10 episodes. And it wasn't based on views, metrics, or results. It was based on process. We can only control our processes, and then the outcomes are, up to God in a lot of ways. We control the input, he controls the output. And so as I have grown older, and I got married, and then I had a mortgage, and I had 2 kids, and I had, 1 employee, 2 employees, 25 employees, 1 business, 2 business, 1 product. As more and more got added onto my plate, I felt, the weight of that. And frankly, like my inability to keep every plate spinning. And there was always one big part of my life in every season that was suffering as the others got priority. For a long time, it was my personal health, or then it was my marriage, or then it was the business. I was like, uh-oh, this needs attending to. Got to put out this fire. Uh-oh, I neglected this other area. Now this fire is blazing. It was fine before. I got to put that one out. And I started to like take a look at my life, especially during COVID, because that gave us all the opportunity to revisit certain things. And I said, the rhythms of my life are not in step with the responsibilities of my life. And you don't rise to the aspirations that you have. You fall to the processes and the rituals, rhythms that you have. And so I developed this, spreadsheet that you mentioned. It used to be in Google Sheets. Now it's in Notion, and it's called Habits of Joy. And what I found are these habits of joy, when they get taken care of, everything else, I become the person that's able to take care of everything else. And when these items start to suffer, something else always starts to suffer as well. And so, I'm looking at it right now. I have, there's, about 15 in here. And they're really everyday things. They're almost all related around personal health. At this point, I have very good rhythms for family, friends, and work. And usually it's the personal health side that gets neglected for the other ones to be taken care of. And so what I've had to do is basically like elevate personal health, because as I became healthier, my capacity grew. And that was the paradox that I almost wasn't aware of before. It's like, if you start going on walks every day for an hour, you'll lose 1 hour, but it's actually going to bring you so much creative output that you didn't have access to before, that it's ironically going to save you time. And that became true of 8 hours of sleep every night. That became true of like cooking meals from scratch instead of getting takeout. Takeout's faster. It's better. Today it is, but over years it won't be. So I track every day going on my walks. I track every day a certain amount of cardio. I track lifting. I track water intake. I track vitamins. I track sleep. I track an AM and PM routine. I track calories, protein, carbs, fiber, saturated fat. And I have this new system this year. It's a color-based system where I don't always have the ability when traveling to track, protein, carbs, fat. If I eat out, I can't get it exactly. So I had this new color-based system where it's red, orange, and green, where if I eat no processed food or ultra-processed food, it's a green day. If I eat a small amount, fewer than 20% of my diet in a given day, it's an orange ribbon. If it's greater than that, it's a red. And so I basically have targets that I want to hit for each of those that I've developed over 5 years at this point. Like, I know if I eat this much unprocessed food, I feel at my best. And these are kind of the benchmark habits that have allowed all the other things to flourish. And like I said, ironically, putting more effort into these, dedicating more time, has unlocked more capacity. And so it was this amazing ROI where I put money away, it compounded, and that money produced more money. Of course, not real money.
No, I love that. I love how you have, you've identified different parts of your life that you want to track, and that over time, I'm sure you could look back and see, maybe even based on what was going on externally, how that affected different parts of your life. Our family has been like, I feel like we've gotten sick multiple times over the past 4 or 5 months. We've got 3 kids, 7, 4, and almost 3. So we're like right there in the thick of like every illness just comes in, and it's just constant. And when I look, I track several things about my own formation and stuff, and I can see when the family was ill, there were several parts of my life, things that I normally did, that didn't happen. And it was like, as we collectively got better, some of those practices came back. Now, I would love to make it in my life where even if everybody is ill, I actually place a higher emphasis, which sounds like what you have been able to do, place a higher emphasis on some of those health priorities, because that's what's going to keep you moving forward instead of getting stuck. So I love the ribbon thing. It's like simple instead of trying to overcomplicate things. So I love the way that
simple. I'm looking at like green ribbons on my wall. It's like, oh, good day green, good day green. It's like it's kindergarten. But what I will say is, my family has been very sick. Sickest year I've had as a family. Not surprised. We have a second kid. My wife had a 5-day flu. I've never seen her this sick. Didn't leave the bed for 5 days. Right before we went on this retreat, we thought we might lose the retreat. They're all going to go. We're going to stay behind. The routines didn't happen on those days.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm okay with that is because it's like a savings account. When the savings account is built up, you can withstand a bad week. But before, I couldn't withstand a bad week because I hadn't built up any, savings. I was already in a deficit. So something like that came around, it was even more destructive. And so it's not about like perfection. It's about really making the right choices most of the time. Because what was getting me in trouble, at least, was not when like things went terribly wrong in the business or at life and I had to attend to that. It was fires I was creating myself by like just not taking care of myself when things are good. Almost just like overindulging when nothing's wrong, and then creating those problems myself. Like, like most of us, we see it in the wisdom of Scripture. We do the things that we don't want to do. We're our own worst enemy. So much of the time.
Yeah, and I can imagine, like, go back to the ribbon thing. The goal is not to have 0 orange and red days.
Correct.
It's to have more green days than you do orange and red days. And it's about consistency over time. And, that's the kind of thing that regardless of what our listeners or viewers are trying to pursue, that kind of concept can get applied to any number of things. So I love the practicality that you've brought to that portion of our conversation. So, hey, I want to make sure that I'm honoring your time. I know that we have gotten through the vast majority of the things, and I would love in the future to have you on again. Our church is restarting a podcast that we did for a little while. We kind of took a little bit of a break just because of a lot of different busy projects that we brought in. So later this year, the podcast will be returning, and we'd love to have you come on as we kind of talk about how we can navigate our own digital worlds as followers of Jesus. So in the future, we'd love to have that conversation. But I want to make sure we're honoring your time, but I want to make sure that we get through our rapid fire-ish questions because these are the things that we like to lay out, just really simple recommendations for people and it's really been interesting to see the variety of answers that we get to these questions. So let's see how rapid-ish we can get through these questions. Okay, so number one, what is one book that you think everybody should read?
I read close to 50 books last year. Standout was Peter Attia's Outlive. It's a book dedicated to personal health. It is dense in respect to its he's a doctor. There's a lot of jargon in there, but he does make it accessible. And I think it's one of those books that's dedicated to longevity. If we want to serve the best and, going back to what Kyle said, like become the best version of ourselves that God envisioned when, he first imagined us, taking care of the temple that we're in is of paramount importance. This book is dedicated to how to do that.
Love it. Love it. What's one movie that you think everybody should watch?
So we have an Oscar party every single year. So hosted that recently. Great fun. I will bike on the stationary bike in my basement for an hour, about 4 times a week. That is when I watch movies. No, I have no other time to watch movies. Surely listeners, you have very busy lives with kids as well. That's how I kind of get the movies in. My wife and I do not have the same taste. We will lay in bed and watch sitcoms over and over again. I'll be, hey babe, have you heard that there's a new show called Shogun? No, I don't want to watch it. Sitcoms only on repeat. So movies I enjoyed last year. Today, I want to just highlight one called The Holdovers. It's Paul Giamatti. It's meant to be this old setting in the 70s, private school, upstate New York, Massachusetts area. And the idea is there are these kids in this private school. They all go off to like their exotic vacations over the Christmas holidays, but there are some that don't. They stay there. They're called the holdovers. And there's one teacher that's in charge of watching them. And these bratty rich kids. And this teacher who, he doesn't have the type of money these kids do. And these kids push him around. It's the conflict and everyone discovers themselves. It's a great movie to watch over Christmas. It's one that you can watch over and over again. Wholesome, like great story that just like, leaves you feeling good. A lot of Oscar movies you watch is like an act of discipline. All right, I'm going to watch the terrible thing happen, but this is the real world and this is art. This is not one of those movies.
Yeah. The Holdovers. Love it. I have not seen that one, so that one will make it on the list of ours. Okay, what's one quote that you live by?
Yeah, I have it on the wall right here on my chalkboard wall. It says, most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. It gets back to process and results. Control the input. The reason I say I'll come on your show after 10 episodes is I want you to demonstrate to me that you care about the input and the process and committing to something for the long term. Anything worthwhile, worth doing, worth achieving, worth experiencing takes a lot of work to get there. And you can do a lot more if you just commit beyond the short-term time frame.
Love that. I love that quote. That's very good. All right. What is your morning routine?
I get up and do creative work in the mornings, usually 5 to 6 a.m. until 8:30. Take the kids to school, drop them off. brush teeth, wash face, make oatmeal, workout, walk, bike, whatever I'm doing, lunch, and then meetings in the afternoon.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Have you always been like an early morning riser, like a 5 a.m. kind of guy, or is that a new thing?
That's new because I was wanting to start the business, but I was in school full time and was working at the church 20 hours a week. I had one window, 3 hours a day to work on the business, 5 to 8 a.m. So I went through this book and it was like called, 30 Days to Becoming an Early Riser. And it was like challenging. It's like, you might think you're a night owl or you might think you're not an early riser. Here's the thing. That's just what you decide. And so I went through 30 days of like waking up early and I achieved that. And so I still do it. And I don't do it every day. It's probably 3 to 4 days a week that I wake up at 5 a.m. And the other days I'll sleep until like 6 or 7. But when I want to get my biggest chunk of creative work done, it's 5 to 8.
Gotcha. Okay, because of how intentional and planned you are, you may actually have a real answer to this one. If you had to eat one meal every day for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Yeah, it would be Chipotle burrito bowl. It's easy. It's rice, it's double chicken, it's fajita veggies, it's corn salsa, it's pico de gallo, it's tomatillo salsa. And that's it. It's going to hit every macro target. It's going to sustain you forever. We don't have Chipotle where I live, but my dad lives in the city. And every time he comes down, he brings Chipotle. And he brought it yesterday. Yeah. And I'm still thinking about it. I make a copycat version myself at home. It's like our most popular family meal. But nothing can compare to true Chipotle. They're supposed to be expanding in Canada. I mean, come on. Come here. Please.
Just counting down the days. I love that. That's so good. That's actually super, super, super close to my Chipotle order. So kindred spirits there. Okay. You guys had a beautiful vacation. We got to see it on social and on your last podcast. But if you could get in a plane today, and you could fly anywhere in the world in 1 hour. So some kind of like supersonic plane or something like that. It gets to remedy a lot of those travel issues with family, particularly with small kids, if that's who you choose. But where would you go and who would you take with you?
So love to travel, do a lot of it. I'm very grateful for that. My wife and I did Dubai and the Maldives earlier this year with our two closest friends. That was sublime. Of course, flew the whole team down to Punta Cana. That was great. I have an affinity for Scandinavia, and we have a trip planned, my first employee and I, in September. And that is the trip right now that I am anticipating the most. We're going to hit Copenhagen, Denmark. We're going to hit Stockholm, Sweden. We're going to hit Oslo and Bergen in Norway. And I am a big fashion guy. Most of my favorite brands are Swedish. And so just excited to experience those cultures and do some shopping. And then we're going to drive through Norway to see the old stave churches, which is going to be really cool as well. So that's what I'm anticipating the most. If I could be there right now, it's March right now. Maybe I'd hold off on the supersonic plane for a month or two to get to some warmer weather and to more sunlight. But I'm a Canadian, we can make it happen.
Yeah. You guys have these things called seasons.
It's true.
We in the South, in the United States, we just have hot and mild. There's not really this thing fall, which I adore. I really wish that we did.
Big fan.
But it's amazing. And yet here it lasts for about 4 days. And then it's just kind of, it'll get cool and then it's just hot. That's the entire thing. So yeah.
But you have Chipotle.
We do have Chipotle. I'm trying to think, I can be to a Chipotle in a matter of about 4.5 minutes. So just come down, just fly all the way, use your 1 hour flight and come down here and then you can have Chipotle with us. So there you go.
Idea.
That would be a very bad waste of a 1 hour flight when you could go to Australia or New Zealand or something like that. Come on.
That's your bang for buck. We're planning New Zealand in 2025. Bang for buck. That is probably the most efficient choice. It was right there. I missed it.
Oh, come on. Look, that's like bucket list item. Yeah, so many places are just, I'm dying to go. Well, hey, Brady, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today on the podcast. It has been a pleasure to get to sit down and chat. I'm really grateful for the work that you guys are doing with Nucleus and Pro Church Tools. You're doing incredible kingdom work, and you are enabling folks like us that don't work for massive churches churches to think differently and to think deeply about how we're impacting the world and really to impact the communities that we're a part of. So I'm really grateful for all of the stuff that you guys have done, and look forward to communicating with you again. If anybody is interested in what you guys have going on, where can they find you the easiest?
Yeah, prochurchtools.com, and then I'm at Brady Shearer on every social platform. We're pretty active on all of them, and so would love to connect there as well.
Yeah, love it, love it. So if you have enjoyed this episode, whether you're listening or watching on YouTube, would you do all of the typical social things? Would you share it with somebody who you think would be blessed by the conversation? Would you click the like button? Because it actually really does help. And most importantly, would you come back next week for the next episode? We're really excited for the conversations we're going to have there. So wherever you are, grace and peace, my friends. Have an amazing day.